Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Sue Monahan. I'm CEO of the Small Cell Forum, and I'd like to welcome you to Small Cell World Summit 2022. First, I'd like to start with a couple of housekeeping items. First is that the UK does not have any government restrictions in place for COVID, so you're welcome to wear masks or not. And if you'd like information on local test centers for those of you like me who need to get tested to go back home or on to your next destination, go to the receptionist desk and they can share some of the local test sites, and I would encourage you to make a reservation to do so. Fire alarms, exits, you can see marked here, but if the fire alarm sounds, please go to the gathering point out this door and follow the folks in the jackets that will direct you. There's no planned alarm tests today. Meeting rooms. If you'd like to use a meeting room, again, please go to the reception and talk to somebody out there about organizing a meeting room. And tonight, we celebrate the Small Cell Forum Awards at a gala dinner. And it is a sold-out event, so I hope you have your tickets. It starts at 7 p.m. And then when you check in there, you'll be checked off the list. So that's it for announcements and housekeeping. So just wanted to share a very warm welcome. It's so nice to see you all. It's great to be back, isn't it? All the conversations I've had already this morning, everybody's so happy to be out of the house. So I'm curious, how many people have attended this event in person before? There are quite a few. Okay, so many of you know the history that Small Cell Forum used to co-locate our plenaries with a conference organization called Clarion. And so 3 years ago, when we last met face-to-face here in London at the Novotel, Clarion had just weeks prior decided to drop small cells from their conference portfolio. So they wanted to cancel the event about 2 months prior to this event. So Small Cell Forum leadership team got together and thought, well, what do we do about this? And we felt that it's just too important of an event not to do it. So we said the show must go on. And so we held this 3 years ago here in London, and it really went well. I mean, for the lack of planning that we had to pull it together, it really went well. So it's good to be back in business, doing it again, and really it was the right decision because SCWS has always been meant to be the global meeting place where we bring a diverse set of ecosystem players to the table to exchange ideas, to network, and to really drive our industry forward. This is where it all happens. Everything small cells, it's all here. So welcome. So we picked up this conferencing business, but it turns out that planning and organizing a conference isn't easy, and it's also not inexpensive. So I would like to extend a very warm welcome to our team at Small Cell Forum, who again pulled this together, albeit with a lot more time for the planning this time. I'm sure it's going to be a great event. And equally important, I would like to thank all of our sponsors shown on the slide. We could not have done this without you. And I particularly like to thank our board members who stepped up right in the beginning to show support for this event. So thank you all very, very much to our sponsors. So we have a lot to cover in just 2 days. And in this morning's opening session, we have Caroline Gabriel from Rethink is going to share the always long-awaited market status update with us. And then we will have a keynote from Qualcomm. And then Caroline's going to come back up and share with you the list of shortlisted award winners that will be announced tonight, who the winners are at the gala dinner. And then Prabhakar, Small Cell Forum Chair, will come back up. He will share the conference highlights, what to expect over the next 2 days. And what Prabhakar shares with you, it's not coincidental that a lot of what we're talking about here aligns with what the work is that we're doing within the Small Cell Forum. So then we'll take a tea break, and probably going to cut that to 20 minutes since we started 10 minutes late, and I'm the timekeeper for the day. And then we'll go right into the sessions. A couple more quick things. Tonight we'll gather for a celebration of the very prestigious Small Cell Industry Awards. That starts at 7 o'clock. It's a sold-out event. As I mentioned, I hope you have your tickets. And then also, this afternoon, we're going to have a celebration for the Small Cell Forum's 15-year anniversary. And I understand that our founding father, Simon Saunders, is going to be here, but I don't see him. Simon, are you here yet? Okay, well, we'll have to make sure he gets here in time because I think he should have the honor of cutting the cake. 15 years ago, Simon founded Femto Forum. So please stop by the stands out here, visit our sponsors and enjoy the show. Also visit SCF stand if you'd like to learn more about how to get involved in the work we're doing in Small Cell Forum. And I'd like to wish you a very successful World Summit and wish you all who submitted entries for the awards very good luck tonight. So let's start with Caroline with the latest market status update.
Thanks very much, Sue, and would certainly like to echo your thoughts about how nice it is to be back and see so many familiar faces after the last couple of years. So welcome to everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Caroline Gabriel. I'm the content director for Small Cell Forum, among various hats that I have. I'm also the co-founder of Rethink Technology Research, and I'm a research director at Analysis Mason. And each year, we put together the market status and forecast for the forum, which I know is always a sort of a hotly awaited report. The key input to this is a survey that we do of operators and small cell deployers. And this year we had response from 76 mobile operators and 42 other deployers of small cells. So that includes private network operators, neutral hosts, and so on. And obviously, those sort of alternative deployers are very central to the forum's work now. And though the responses to the survey, they tell us about their deployment plans, their business models, and so on. And that feeds into the forecast, which will be published in its entirety next month. So you'll see the full report. Today, I'm just going to share a few highlights as a taster of that report and hope that they will stimulate your interest, and I think they will set the scene for a lot of the themes of the next 2 days. The forum itself is very much guided by operators and deployers, so it's no coincidence that the shaping of the forum's program, which is reflected in the themes of this summit, very much align with what we're hearing from the respondents to the forecast. So when we look at the role of small cells, we've identified this year 5 key areas that we think are essential to the next phase of 5G, to really starting to fulfill the promise of 5G, which to date has largely been focused, as we know, on what we call 4G plus business models centered on mobile broadband. So there are 5 areas, and they're highlighted also in the brochure, the conference brochure content that you'll see, that we think are important and where small cells are playing a central role, sometimes a leading role even ahead of macro network deployments. So a diversity of use cases, particularly as 5G standalone starts to be deployed. A diversity of operating models to support these different use cases, including private networks, neutral hosts, shared networks, and so on. Evolution of the architecture to support a much wider variety of use cases and services. A lot of that architecture evolving on the basis of open standards, such as small cell Open RAN. And a greater diversity in spectrum and regulation, which is critical to enabling some of these new deployers. And all these trends will help to drive the growth in deployment of small cells, which you can see just the very top level result of the forecast. Here split by region, this is all kinds of small cells, public, private. As I say, when the full report is published, you'll see lots of breakdowns by different types of small cell, different business models. But just to give the top line, you can see it's not a straight curve. There's a CAGR of about 19% between now and 2026. You can see quite a sharp uptick from between 2021 to 2023. A lot of that's driven by enterprise and the start of 5G in private networks. Then it eases off a little bit and we get another big leap towards 2026. That's partly driven by some emerging economies starting to densify, also by the next phase of 5G rollouts. As I say, the overall big driver is that 5G is becoming real, emerging for its 4G plus phase and starting to drive real change in what industries, mobile operators and all kinds of enterprises will actually do with wireless connectivity, and that in turn is changing the structure of the industry that supports those networks. So you can see in this graph, this is showing the increase in 5G as part of that installed base that we just saw on the first slide. So getting up to about 11 million cells in total, but by 2026, about 90% will have some 5G in. Many of these will be multi-network. But the importance of this is not just that 5G is part of emerging networks, it's hardly a big surprise, but that it is driving this diversity of use cases, which in turn require a very wide range of capabilities from the network. So, to be honest, if we stick with 4G+, most small cells could stay 4G for years to come, and the installed base is very 4G centric. We see that particularly in private networks. There has to be a reason to upgrade and expand these networks with 5G. And there's quite a lot of trends and patterns that we see causing this. Some of it is the migration to 5G standalone, also to using wireless connectivity for mission critical applications, moving way beyond coverage and capacity, which were the traditional use cases for small cells. And some of that's relating to deployment in industries that do have critical comms requirements, such as transport, manufacturing, and so on. To support this diversity of applications, architectural change is important, but it's not sufficient on its own. The new flexible architectures that we'll see discussed during the summit are extremely important to be able to support different network behaviours cost effectively, but there has to be an expansion of the deployment models and the ways to monetize these networks once they're in place. So the classic MNO public network model will remain important, but it's not the only game in town at all. And this sort of diversity is enabled by progressive policies in spectrum, in siting, particularly outdoors, in sharing of the networks, and in introducing open platforms at every layer. This isn't just about RAN interfaces, it's about every layer of the network. And all that put together allows the wireless network to deliver a great deal more than mobile broadband. And on in the pie chart, you can see a result from those 46 enterprise and alternative deployers that I mentioned who responded to the survey, in terms of what they are seeing as the leading connectivity requirement that will drive their business model and their deployment. Because most of these alternative deployers have to justify their business model by going beyond coverage and capacity, by doing something that is not currently delivered by present networks. And you can see that truly ubiquitous coverage tops the list here. We've never achieved that with cellular networks, but a lot of industrial and IoT applications absolutely require it. Then low latency, integration of edge computing, extreme density, quality of experience in building, and the integration of AI analytics, particularly for sensor-based applications. So as I say, to support all these different use cases and all these different enterprise sectors which have different specific requirements of their own, one set of operators and service providers cannot possibly address that whole market. And so much of the Small Cell Forum's work in the last 2 or 3 years has centred on encouraging and supporting alternative models such as neutral host. And you can see the result of that. So this is the forecast broken down by the percentage of cells deployed up to 2026. And you can see that although, of course, MNOs remain an extremely big part of this picture, we estimate that they will, although they deployed over 40% of cells in 2019, by 2026 that will be just over 20%. And the big growth is in the neutral host platforms, going from 6% to 30%. I mentioned 5G standalone at the beginning. It's just sort of starting to become real this year. The big headlines are on the big public networks, of course, and we're seeing operators in the United States, China, Japan, and so on, starting to deploy the 5G core and 5G networks that really can enable these very different capabilities. But in fact, a lot of the drive behind early standalone is actually coming from enterprise and private networks. It's always easier to deploy a new generation of technology in a greenfield situation, and many enterprise and industrial networks are largely greenfield or just have Wi-Fi in place. And there are lots of offerings coming to market that combine small cells, sometimes a network in a box, sometimes a cloud-based small cell network, with a cut-down enterprise core that can even be deployed on-premise. So we're seeing a lot of the sort of innovation in what you can do with standalone coming from enterprise and therefore coming from small cells, whereas in the macro network everything's a little more slow and conventional. So you can see here, as of the end of the first quarter, we tracked the number of standalone networks that were being deployed at a reasonable amount of scale, and you can see that there were 74 small cell examples compared to about 20 macro. That's not surprising. I mean, there should be larger numbers of small cell networks. There are more of them. But more interestingly, it's the innovation in how they're being deployed that caught our eye. So 24% of them in the small cell world are being delivered by new vendors to the market or by multiple vendors as people move to cloud-based core. And the numbers that are being deployed by private or neutral host alternative deployers, 47% of these small cell networks in standalone environment. So above the curve for small cell enterprise networks as a whole, as compared to just one down in the macro network. The core is, and the standalone network is fundamental to enabling all the use cases that we've been talking about. But architectural change in general is also important, partly to open up the ecosystem, but also to improve the agility of the network, the scalability of the network. So here's our forecast looking at enterprise and industrial small cells by their architecture. These are subsets, by the way, of each other. So the yellow is the total. The blue is any kind of virtualized RAN, and the orange is something with open RAN interfaces such as the split 6 that Small Cell Forum works around, or the O-RAN split. And by 2026, we expect that about 70% of enterprise small cells will be adopting a virtualized architecture, and the big majority of those will support some flavor of Open RAN, at least as a minimum with the interfaces between the radio unit and the baseband unit. But some, of course, will also be deploying more extensive new platforms, such as the RAN intelligent controller. All of this helps to support the diversity of deployment and use cases. It helps new vendors to innovate, and it helps operators and enterprises to have access to those innovations. The risk of any sort of open network movement, and we've seen this many times through the history of this industry, is that it can be so open that it becomes very fragmented. So many vendors, many architectures and so on, it can risk leading to a lack of scale for anybody, which in turn usually then triggers a consolidation and a bit of a reverting to the original situation. The way to avoid this, of course, is to have open foundations on which everybody can innovate equally. This is hard to achieve, and I would say it's probably, once you move above the radio standard set by 3GPP, it probably has never really succeeded in the mobile industry yet. But we can look at the data center industry and the IT world and see many examples of the success of open foundations driving diversity and creativity. And we believe that the sort of use cases that 5G is now driving will be the trigger for a very new approach to open standards within the mobile industry. The core radio standards, of course, remain critical, but they are not enough on their own to support the diversity of what people and companies want to do with mobile networks. And this is where forums and alliances become very critical at distilling the requirements that the various stakeholders have and translating those into specifications that are deployable and that are actually useful to deliver what's needed. Theoretical specifications may be architecturally interesting, but they will rarely succeed in the real world. So a lot of focus, and you'll hear a lot about it in this conference, from the forum and from other stakeholders in the small cell industry, on setting open specifications, blueprints, reference designs, but ones that are really tightly aligned to the requirements of the sort of industries that are leading demand for dense 5G networks, such as manufacturing, transportation, entertainment, and so on. There are obviously various open architectures. There's a lot of work by different alliances to try to align with one another. The Small Cell Forum itself, as you know, bases its work on the, with its NFAPI and Split 6 work on the 3GPP's Split 6 between the radio unit and the baseband. And you can see the growth in the percentage of operators that expect to deploy that by 2026. So almost half of small cell deployers, or would-be deployers, expect to deploy Split 6 in some scenarios by 2026. They may also deploy other splits as well, and there's a session tomorrow on Open RAN where we'll share a lot more detail actually about what came out of this survey, about the often very complicated approach to open architectures. But what's really important, as I say, that there should be plenty of choices and plenty of flexibility for deployers, but for vendors, underneath all this, there needs to be a common foundation to drive scale and cost effectiveness. And here, I think work that the forum has been doing is important, not just on specs, but turning those into reference designs, which in turn can support blueprints for deployment in specific industries. This helps to make the diversity of business models more achievable and more cost-effective. And as those deployments take place, that real-world experience can be fed back into the next generation of specs and reference designs. And I think if you have to pick one critical role of an industry alliance such as Small Cell Forum, that is probably it. It's continual cycle of taking requirements from the industry, understanding them, turning them into foundations, and then refining them as the real-world situations become clear. So, just one other aspect of this diversification of the platform, and that's spectrum. The spectrum that's available and how it's licensed and regulated. For new deployers to be able to address the needs of industries where perhaps the M&O model is not appropriate, they will obviously need access to spectrum, and they will need it cost effectively and in the right places and the right capacity. The amount of spectrum and the way it's regulated, of course, is always defines the networks that can be deployed, macro or small cell. But we are starting to see innovation in spectrum licensing, and again, we'll hear a lot about it in the conference. We all know about the innovations that are going on around the CBRS spectrum, in the United States, which is setting some really important precedents for other regulators elsewhere. But we're also seeing shared access, lightly licensed, local license schemes here in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Japan, in many parts of the world where enterprise and industrial 5G is seen as being part of the national industrial agenda. So it's not just part of a telecom industry model anymore. And the graph here shows the deployment of small cell radios by the type of spectrum, so by licensed and by the various shared or local or light licensing schemes that are available around the world. And of course, there's more breakdown of this in the report. But by the time we get to 2026, you can see that about 60% of small cells are being deployed in non-licensed spectrum, which equates quite heavily to the presence of the alternative deployers in the market. So just a final remark to show the sort of impact of these trends and of the industry coming together to address them. It's still the very early stages of the 5G small cell networks in the enterprise market. So there is considerable upside and downside depending how all these factors play out and how the industry responds. So in our forecast, we obviously have best and worst cases. You can see by the percentages just how much there is to play for here. And we believe the real decider of pushing the industry more towards the upside model, which is 45% more in terms of units than our base case. We think that the key element of that will be cooperation across the industry and between all stakeholders, not just the telecoms industry, but the other industries that want to use wireless networks. And we think all the things we've talked about in these 20 minutes are important to pushing us towards the best case rather than down. There's a risk case of about minus 27%. If there isn't unity on architectures and if there isn't a clear response to the demands of enterprise. And on the right is just the same exercise done specifically for the neutral host deployments, which we think can play a very interesting role in driving more numbers into small cell networks by deploying networks that otherwise wouldn't exist, no one would find a business case for them. So a similar sort of upside and downside model you can see, also quite dramatic in the neutral host small cells. I'm going to stop there because we have a packed agenda and I know Sue wants to keep us to time. And so thank you for listening. Do catch me. I'm around for the whole conference, so if you want to discuss any of this, and do look out for the full report, which will be published next month. And look forward to the conference. I know it's going to be a really great event.
Thank you, Caroline. We look forward to the full report. Really interesting. Next up, we have the keynote from Qualcomm. It's my pleasure to introduce George Tsirtsis. He's the Senior Director of Technology at Qualcomm. Hopefully I'm close on your last name.
You're perfect, actually. It's amazing.
Pretty good.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Let me first of all echo the fact that it's very nice to be here live again, although let's not overdo it, folks. And let me start by saying a little bit about who am I and what am I doing here. So for the last 4 years, since 2018, I have been responsible for Qualcomm's activities in the European region, basically working with all the mobile operators, the infra vendors, and our customers, the smartphone manufacturers, the device manufacturers, to bring 5G to the European region. So that has given me a kind of a nice vantage point from which to kind of observe this process. And I think I understand a little bit about where we are at the moment and what is yet to be done to deliver the full vision of 5G, if you like. So, of course, we are just, I think, in the 3rd year of 5G deployments this is going to be surely a cycle of at least 10 years, like every other cellular generation. And although 5G is deploying faster than 4G ever was, the scope of 5G is so much larger as well. So what I'm going to talk about today is what we have to do next. What is the job to be done for achieving the full 5G vision, and do that in a way that I show you why I think that it is the ecosystem in this room that will have to play a very instrumental role to getting this done. So 5G was designed with the three very well-known pillars in mind, eMBB, URLLC, massive IoT. So far, we have been dealing with the first one, enhanced mobile broadband. We have deployed basically 3.5 gigahertz in the cities, overlaying essentially 5G on top of what is the 1800 megahertz grid that was designed basically for 4G. And we have extended the reach of the networks by also deploying NR on FTD bands. So we still have a lot to do, right? And as we have to deal with the rest, things are going to get rather interesting and more complicated, because this one network will have to deal with a lot more use cases, a lot more different types of devices, and we'll have to go to every nook and cranny of the network. And to do that, we will need the networks to take a little bit of a transformation. They need to be dense enough to be able to take full advantage of the high frequencies of 5G, both 3.5 gigahertz and millimeter wave. They will have to be flexible enough in terms of deployment models to serve all the different use cases. And of course, they have to be cost effective. They have to be secure, and more importantly than ever, they have to be power efficient. So there is so much to be done. And I think, again, if you think about all these next steps, a lot of it will have to be done with technologies that we are talking about in this forum. This transformation will be driven by four trends, maybe a few more, but I'll mention four here. Densification with small cells, either straightforward small cells or neutral host, very important trend. Millimeter wave, which is a huge opportunity for small cells in its own right. Private networks, of course, and the overarching trend of virtualized and open RANs. So I'll take these in turn, and let's see. Let's start from here. So 5G has been deployed, as I said, primarily outdoors today. But we know for a fact that a lot of the capacity requirements of the networks come from indoor locations. In fact, I was rereading an Ericsson mobility report from last year that was talking about 5G indoors. And I was reminded about that well-known fact that about 70%, in some cases even 80%, according to the report, of traffic that is consumed by mobile cellular networks is in fact originating indoors. And the Ericsson colleagues asked the further question of, okay, but how much of that traffic is actually served by cellular networks that are outdoors versus, for example, indoor DAS and small cells that are already deployed indoors. And they found that it's something like 63% of that in urban environments is served by outdoors networks. And even in residential areas, something like 42% is carried by outdoors networks. So this is all traffic that is not carried by Wi-Fi, right? And Wi-Fi is ubiquitous indoors. So sometimes when I talk about 5G, the need to bring 5G indoors, I get a little bit of pushback. by people who say that, okay, but Wi-Fi will take care of that traffic indoors. And this is clearly not the case. By the way, make no mistake, Qualcomm is the leading chipset manufacturer in Wi-Fi. We are all for it. But there is clearly a need for 5G indoors as well. And there are a lot of other things that will make this need even more important in the future. So here are some drivers for indoor 5G. First of all, the whole workforce went home for a couple of years, right? We had to work from home for the last 2 years, and that caused all our companies to move all their systems to the cloud. They had to make available the productivity tools, the data to all the employees, all of us, to be able to work from wherever we were. And indeed, this did not just accelerate the working from home practice, it accelerated the working from anywhere practice. So we are, in fact, now able to be as productive in the office, at home, on transit, in here, or even at the coffee store at the corner, or at the beach, where it's my favorite place to be. And beyond that, the application ecosystem is also changing. Okay, that will create additional traffic requirements. First of all, the thing that happened with the last couple of years is that video telephony became a thing. We have been trying to do this since the days of 3G, and it took a pandemic to get it done. But now, what's happening is that not only our smartphones, but also our computers, our laptops are communications devices, they are collaborations devices. And beyond that, what's coming next is things like virtual reality, which is maturing quite fast. I think virtual reality will change the way we communicate and collaborate, and even augmented reality that with glasses like this is cutting edge at the moment. Augmented reality glasses that connect to your smartphone or laptop. These ones are from Lenovo. They contain a Qualcomm chipset inside. And they have the opportunity to change the whole of the user interface to the internet, right? By the way, we just announced a wireless version of those. So this is an industry that is evolving quite fast. So all these things will generate more and more traffic. And a lot of this traffic will be indoors. And the question is, how will cellular networks will deal with this? Because all the 5G spectrum that we get now is mainly higher in the spectrum range, and deploying it outdoors is not going to be enough. So the answer, of course, is small cells. What a surprise. And it is small cells because of a few reasons. First of all, small cells indoors will be able to fully reuse this new spectrum. So 26 gigahertz for sure, but also 3.5 gigahertz, because there is hardly any interference between an indoors deployment and outdoors in these bands. And this creates a lot of nice spectrum reuse, a lot of spectral efficiency. At the same time, when you deploy small cells indoors, you take all these users that are currently at the very edge of the outdoors macro network, which consumes a lot of resources to serve, and you put them right in the middle of a small cell deployment, again, serving them very efficiently. And this is, and because, of course, small cells are smaller in form factor, they are cheaper to deploy, to purchase and deploy, this deployment indoors can be done gradually. You can keep adding small cells as the capacity requirements increase. And that's what will keep the quality of experience for the users for today's use cases as well as the future applications will keep the quality of experience high. Okay, so this is, by the way, where millimeter wave comes in as well. We did another study with, this time sponsored by Qualcomm, with Bell Labs Consulting, we asked Bell Labs to look at the business case of millimeter wave in a region like Europe where 3.5 gigahertz already exists, has been deployed. So what is the ROI for millimeter wave? And what they found, and by the way, this is in contrast to what happened in the US, where millimeter wave was the first spectrum that was used for 5G. And what they found is that with using the UK actually as an example, they found that if an operator here was to use, to redirect 12% of their CapEx to a millimeter wave deployment that is extremely focused to the most densely populated places of the network where most of the traffic is generated, they would get something like 24% of the population of their customers covered daily by 5G millimeter wave, and that would create a return on investment within 5 years, 4.8 years, in fact, as opposed to the usual in sub-6 frequencies that is 7 to 8 years. So there is a strong business case for millimeter wave. And if you think about what I just described in terms of where this deployment needs to be, all these places are going to be either indoors or outdoors, but places where there needs to be some kind of densification. So again, right in our sites here. It's worth also taking a minute to discuss what is millimeter wave used for these days. This is a sample of activities we are involved with across the globe. The first thing to note here is that there is a huge variety in use cases. Fixed wireless access, of course, is an important one for millimeter wave, wireless fiber, as we call it. But a lot of the use cases here are enterprise-driven, stadiums, airports, industry, and a lot of them are mobile as well. And it's worth saying that millimeter wave at this point is a very mature technology. Okay, so in Qualcomm, we are on our 5th generation of millimeter wave chipsets and millimeter wave antenna modules. And we have the US, which has deployed now millimeter wave for a few years. And that is, if you like, has cleaned the pipe for the rest of us. So now it's much easier to get that in different regions. In fact, as an example, in Japan started recently to deploy millimeter wave. This deployment is going quite fast. They have access to millimeter wave smartphones, not only in the premium tier, but also in lower tiers, as well as other types of devices, and of course, small cells, which drive a lot of the deployment. So in summary, so far, the densification with small cells in both sub-6 and millimeter wave and the deployment of small cells indoors is the main job to be done in the next few years for 5G. And it is, again, it is us here that we are going to do it. So let me switch gears now to talk about the other driver of small cells, which is also very exciting, private networks. So there are three types of those. This one is a public network with a private slice, where there are not a lot of resources that are dedicated for the private network itself. All the spectrum, the control, the data are all going to the cloud. Nevertheless, it's a very important use case. We're working very closely with operators to make this happen. And you know, if you have a use case where you have many devices dispersed across a large geography, and they are also moving, let's say a fleet of trucks or something like that, then a slice is a good approach. The second type is an integrated private network, where some of the resources start to become private network specific. Maybe the spectrum is private or not. Maybe it's owned by the operator. Certainly the control functions are still run by the operator, but maybe some of the data path is contained at either on premises, so the corporate is maintaining control of the data or on a private cloud. And the third one, of course, is the one that is a completely independent private network. There, all of the resources, the spectrum, from the spectrum to the SIM cards, the control and data path are all dedicated to the private enterprise. In the first two cases, the mobile operators have a natural advantage, and we work with them to enable them to go after that market. On the third one, the wider ecosystem will compete, and that is also great. So the one thing to remember is that this factory-looking icon right there could be really anything. It could be an office, it could be an industrial plant, or it could be a small, medium-sized enterprise. So there is a very long tail there, right? So there is a big opportunity to go after that market. And the challenge really is how we scale, how we do all this, how do we deal with all these smaller, large networks at the same time. And in fact, there are a bunch of different challenges, which I'm listing here, in terms of fully taking advantage of a 5G private network capabilities. First of all, as we have said multiple times now, there is a variation in use cases. An office, a port, and an industrial plant are very different beasts. They have different requirements. They will use different types of applications. And the level of expertise of that exists in each of these enterprises it varies significantly. In fact, in terms of 5G, we must assume that there is zero expertise, right? So the question is, how does the customer even know how to take advantage of 5G capabilities in a private network setting? How do they extract that? And this is an education issue, right? We have to work with the different verticals, the different customers to do that. I know a lot of you, including ourselves, we are involved in this kind of discussions, POCs, trials, etc. There is also a diversity of suppliers in this type of networks, and this is a great thing. We are really strongly believe that there is no one size fits all in private networks. It's great that vendors create different types of devices, different different price points, different form factors to serve all these different use cases. But the challenge then is, how do you deliver? How does the customer? How are they able to leverage all these different vendors in the system without going crazy with the interoperability efforts? Right. This is the challenge. Also, there is an optimization issue. How do we optimize for the different private network use cases? Again, industrial plant and an office require many very different types of networks. And in the macro networks, we are very much involved to align roadmaps across the ecosystem by working very closely with all the infra vendors, for example, to deliver the next generation of product from either side, the chipset side and the network side. And this is all focused around the smartphone, eMBB for the global market, right? So it's a very, very intense process, takes months in advance, a rolling exercise. But for private networks, that's not coming so naturally. So this is a challenge to be addressed here. Finally, the location and environments of the private networks is going to be very different. Just because you deployed one private network in one place does not make it so easy to replicate. This is not software. There's no zero marginal cost for anything. Physical world requires a lot of effort. So this is also to keep in mind. Okay, so there is a lot to be addressed. I will point out to three things that we think are very, very important. First of all, the performance of the 5G private network has to be top-notch. It really has to shine and be clear to the customer that this is the best performing network they can get. And frankly, just by having access to wide bandwidth, which we have in many locations now, as Caroline mentioned earlier with respect to local spectrum that is becoming the norm for higher frequencies, we can get often something like 100 megahertz on 3.8 gigahertz or 400 or even 800 megahertz millimeter wave, and that gives a very good basis for a very high performing 5G private network. Of course, we also need control. Okay, so you can have all this bandwidth, but you need control because we need to be able to separate use cases. We need to protect critical traffic from best effort, video, collaboration traffic. And this is very important because these 5G private networks need to become and to be understood by the customer as platforms. They will go to market with one use case, but they need to believe, and it needs to be true, that they can carry all kinds of things, and the private network infrastructure investment will be utilized for a lot more than the go-to-market use case they pick. The second point is that we have to pre-integrate the multi-vendor solutions. Again, it's a feature of this ecosystem that we have many vendors. It's a great thing, but we have to pre-integrate the solutions because it cannot be done to the customer to do that work. The end customer or the system integrator of whoever puts the network in has to be able to leverage solutions from different vendors who address the customer's needs very easily. And finally, we have to simplify the deployment and management of the systems. Again, in macro networks, we have network operation centers with many, many employees taking care of the networks. Of course, you cannot assume that that can happen in a private setting. In fact, the ceiling of what an enterprise can do should be considered the enterprise Wi-Fi systems. And that's as hard as it can be. And in fact, I believe, and I think it can be done, 5G private networks can be much simpler than that. So, by the way, this is not kind of idle talk from us. Qualcomm is investing heavily in this ecosystem. Of course, we are well known for providing chipset solutions to device side and to the small cells, but we are now going much beyond that. We recently announced a RAN automation platform that is designed for plug-and-play deployments and automated operations, and we are taking this together with small cells from the ecosystem and 5G cores. We pre-integrate all this in our labs, and we create, if you like, at communication level, a turnkey solutions which we then work through system integrators to deliver to the market. We really think this will help. This pre-integration effort will help get these networks much easier to the market than otherwise. Okay, finally, let me touch upon Open RAN and virtualized RAN. This is an overarching trend that it's somewhat tangential to small cells, you can say, but it's, of course, driven by the same kinds of trends. O-RAN disaggregates the system, places a lot of the high-level functions in software, so the evolution of the software innovation can happen independently from hardware. It modularizes the system so that individual companies, indeed, in many cases, smaller companies, are able to focus on one part of the system, provide value, and innovate there without having to worry about boiling the ocean. And in the end, it results in the multi-vendor solutions that are getting into the market nowadays, and which will have lower cost overall, but also faster innovation. Again, in Qualcomm, we believe strongly in this trend. We invest heavily across this ecosystem. We have products that address all parts of O-RAN, providing high performance at lower power consumption. And importantly, they do provide a level of kind of natural interoperability between RAN components and RAN and end devices as well. So we are very excited about that. So let me conclude here. I think the job to be done for 5G is clear. It's going to be driven largely by the ecosystem represented in this room, and the result of delivering this 5G vision is going to be amazing. I think we're all going to be proud of the network that we create and the infrastructure we create for the future, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, George. Thank you very much, George. Great keynote. Set the foundation for the next 2 days, so that's great. Next, I'd like to invite Caroline back up to talk about the awards shortlist.
Thanks, Sue. Another of my sort of roles within the Small Cell Forum is one of the really fun ones, is to be the chair of the judging panel for the Small Cell Awards, which are held every year for, I think it's maybe 12 years now. Long time anyway. Every year we get together a panel of independent experts, analysts and other industry players to judge these awards, and we thought obviously we're going to announce the winners in the gala dinner celebration this evening, and hope that many of you will be able to come and hear the results. But we just wanted to highlight the companies that have been shortlisted, and to sort of emphasise, I'll talk more about this evening, but I think it's worth reiterating that Small Cell Forum has a very rigorous, very objective judging process. So being on these shortlists really does mean something. I'm sure some of my fellow judges are in the room, but we do get invited to be part of a lot of judging panels, and very few of them do have quite such an in-depth process as we go through for these. A lot of them are sort of online only. We always insist on having a very extensive personal discussion with all the judges, so that we can really tap into each other's experience rather than purely reading submissions. So we have a lot of discussion and conversation before we arrive at these shortlists, because we recognise it's a responsibility, particularly in quite a defined sector. It means a lot to companies to be picked out in this way. So tonight we'll hear who gets the actual awards, but everyone on the shortlist has done very well. We had one change this year, was we didn't sort of insist on having the same number of companies in every shortlist. We really just wanted to take, whether it was 2 or 3, the entries in each category that really stood out from the crowd, as you'll see now. So I'm just going to run really quickly through the companies that have succeeded, and to congratulate them all in advance, and good luck for those who will be announced as the winners later. But you can see on the screen, but for the excellence in commercial deployment by an MNO, I think this is one of the award categories that we've had consistently through all the years of the awards. Sometimes the categories change a little bit to reflect changes in the industry, different things that are becoming important, but of course MNO deployment remains extremely important. And shortlisted we have Ericsson with Ooredoo, Mavenir with Vodafone UK, and Rakuten Mobile with Airspan. And you'll hear lots more details about all of these entries later, and there'll be a little brochure to explain what was actually nominated. Then a newer category, of course, but very central to what the Small Cell Forum's activities are, as we've already talked about today, excellence in commercial deployment by sort of alternative deployers. So firstly by neutral host, where we have Boingo Wireless, Mobility and Wireless Infrastructure Group shortlisted, and also deployment by private network operator, where we have Airspan with Druid, Betacom, and again Boingo Wireless. Then we come to our more technology categories. So the first 3 are all about commercial, real-world success. The next ones are looking at the companies who are contributing to driving forward the technologies and the architectures in the way that George was just talking about in the keynote. And indeed, Qualcomm is shortlisted for the outstanding small cell technology, and this is technology that's actually in commercial use. Qualcomm is shortlisted with Corning, and also shortlisted in this category Ericsson and Geo Platforms. Then we have a specific category that looks at the software and services, and again this is for commercially adopted technology. And shortlisted here are ITRI from Taiwan, Inosa, and also ITRI with Pegatron. So they have two bites at the cherry there, the Industrial Technology Research Institute, always a great contributor to the forum. Then the next one looks more at technology that is emerging. So this is an innovation award. It's less focused on commercial deployment and more to companies that are really sort of pushing forward the boundaries of what these small cell networks can look like to respond to the new requirements and demands that we've been discussing so far this morning. And here our successful shortlisted companies are Silona, Mavenir, and again Geo Platforms. We will hear quite a lot about the components. We already, of course, heard from George, but there are a lot of companies in this very open environment that's emerging who are developing the various chips and components that, of course, are an essential starting point to all of the technology that we're talking about. And here we selected just two shortlisted companies for this particular award, and that was Picocom and Raycon. Then we look at business cases. So there's always innovation in technology, but to achieve the results that we're hoping for, that we saw the potential for in that market forecast presentation, there also has to be innovation in the business model and the business case. So for the outstanding contribution to a new business case for small cells, we shortlisted Betacom, Crown Castle, and Qualcomm. And then looking specifically at what the forum thinks is a very important element of that expanding business model, which is multi-operator or neutral host business models, we looked for a commercial product or service that was really helping to enable or drive those particular models in the market. And here, again, we just highlighted two entries from the list that we had for this one. So these are particularly outstanding contributions, and they were from Cellnex Ireland and Ericsson. We've talked a lot already, and we'll talk more about open platforms in small cells. And here we were looking at organisations that have made a particularly outstanding contribution to pushing open specs and standards forward in all layers of the network. And here we see ITRI again, this time nominated with Pegatron, and also Radisys and STL. And the next category is another one that has been part of the awards every year since they were initiated. And this one looks beyond the sort of telecom and industrial business to the wider social and economic impact that can be achieved with small cell networks. So it's a really important one to the wider objectives of our industry. And in more recent years, we've added environmental impact to that, because of course that's a theme that is incredibly important to everybody in the industry and beyond. And our shortlist for this category is BAI Communications with Sunderland City Council, BT Wholesale, and Freshwave with Virgin Media O2. And then finally, we have a special Judge's Choice category. I'll explain more about this evening. It's always an important one, and it's usually one that accounts for a lot of the discussion that we have as a panel. But really here we look at the whole, all of the submissions that we have, and particularly sometimes at companies that perhaps didn't make a shortlist in a category, not because they were not worthy, but because perhaps they didn't totally fit in the category, or because we feel their impact is bigger and wider than just a single category. So the judge's choice is an opportunity to highlight a contribution that perhaps doesn't quite fit within the category definitions that we have for the awards. And the judge's choice candidates this time are Boingo Wireless, Corning working with Qualcomm, and Raycon. So please join us, I hope a lot of you will, to hear who the winners will be at the dinner this evening. As I say, well done to everyone that made shortlists, and it's been an enormous pleasure to chair the judging panel again and to read through all the really interesting and high quality contributions and submissions that we had. And with that, I will hand back to Sue.
Thank you, Caroline. Next, I'd like to introduce SCF Chair Prabhakar Chitrapu, who's going to talk about the conference highlights.
At the risk of making you all annoyed by repeating what all my previous speakers have already said, let me say it's great to meet in person again after 3 years of the pandemic and virtual meetings. Thank you all for attending in person and making this event a success already. You all have seen the agenda and were obviously convinced of its importance and relevance to the industry today, which is obviously the reason why you're here. So I will not repeat many of the details of the agenda, but only try to highlight some of the salient aspects. Unless, of course, I finish too fast and I have spare time to kill. The first is about what really drove the agenda. Okay? Basically, we identified 3 things that we thought and we think are central to the 5G small cell industry today. These are private small cell networks and enterprise connectivity, neutral hosts and digital infrastructure, and last but not least, Open RAN with the promise of diversification and enrichment of our RAN ecosystem. We covered these 3 themes in 3 sessions, each having 2 to 3 sub-sessions, and each including presentations and panel discussions. And again, if I have time, I'll elaborate a little bit more. For now, I'll just move on. The participants in these presentation sessions and panel discussions are esteemed members and thought leaders of our industry, of our end-to-end ecosystem, starting from components all the way to deployers, operators, and even regulators and policymakers. In addition to the presentations and panels that will happen here, we also have an exhibition space where you have a rich display of many of the products and solutions from our vendor ecosystem. So, since I do have 3.5 minutes, before coffee is ready, I would have let you go earlier on, but you'll be disappointed because coffee isn't filled yet. So you'll have to bear with me. So let me talk briefly about the 3 sessions. The first one is about enterprise and private networks. So here, we will first look at the requirements, because that's the most important driver, and then we look at the service delivery aspects. In the requirement space, it's important to recognize, I'm not suggesting it's not recognized, the diversity of requirements in the situation that we are in now. In the past, where small cells were deployed by MNOs largely and so on, the requirements were probably more homogeneous. But with the enablement of enterprise, which ranges all the way from manufacturing to office complexes to hospitals to health, education and so on, the requirements vary greatly. And so it's very important to focus and bring in the stakeholders. So that's what we'll focus. And the presentations will cover, as a small example set, smart cities, commercial properties, and multi-operator scenarios, and neutral host use cases. Because neutral host, as Caroline has showed, is one of the emerging deployer components. In terms of the service delivery part, we will focus on, do these requirements match the solutions that the industry is putting forth? Because that has to be the case. And again, we will look at this in a couple of different cases. One is the connected UK, a countrywide solution, smart cities, scaling down a bit, and then also looking at transport sector. And the other thing is Open RAN, which is something that we've all been hearing about and talking about. How does the Open RAN solution set match the requirements of diverse enterprises? So these are what will be covered in the service delivery sessions. Then we move on to the second session, which is focusing more on how to take these solutions and the requirements and lead them to commercial successful deployments. So here there are at least two major components. One is the deployment aspects themselves, ease of deployment and best practices and so on. And the second is the regulation and policy, equally important to facilitate or and accelerate the deployment. So with that being the theme, we have an excellent and a very comprehensive set of presentations, starting with JOTS and the great work, pioneering work they have done in setting policies. Then we'll have a presentation on how the policy has been evolving in the US, then in Europe, and then, so we pretty much covered a good part of the world. Unfortunately, we don't have Asia represented, but we will cover that too. Then the other thing which is very important in this consideration is security in diversity. Diversity is the big buzzword, right? Open RAN, multiple vendors, innovation, faster innovation, cheaper deployments, and agility and flexibility. There are so many positives there. But one of the things that is becoming apparent is how does it translate to security? As you open up more, there are more points of vulnerability. And so this is something that the governments and so on are becoming increasingly conscious of, and the industry is addressing. So there'll be a talk on that one as well. So that's going to be a great session. And then we'll move on to the third session, which is focused on architectures and solutions. And so here we'll talk about the diversity of architectures and components that are available, and not only disaggregated solutions, but private networks also highlights the importance of all-in-one solutions. So a network in a box kind of solutions are as needed as completely disaggregated solutions. So we'll talk about that. And then end-to-end architecture considerations from service point of view. And then we will focus a little bit more on the technology side, again coming back to Open RAN, when we will start again with the market, a deeper look at the market situation from Open RAN perspective, and then look at what is the current state and how to make Open RAN a reality in today's environment. And then we'll have a presentation on how is this going to evolve, how is Open RAN evolving into the future. So that's kind of a snapshot, and then we have a wonderful, wonderful workshop on private networks tomorrow afternoon. It is so in-depth and so broad, I think you should definitely all make it a point to attend that. So with that, let me go back to my concluding words. What is it that we would like to achieve by the end of this event? Education and insights into where we are, what the promises and challenges are, and what the future holds for the 5G small cell proliferation. Additionally, one important point I'd like to mention. The industry, it's clear to all of us, is at a cusping point for 5G, Open RAN, enterprise digitalization through secure and reliable connectivity and providing a platform to provide enterprise services and development of flexible digital infrastructure through neutral hosts. For this potential to mature into a thriving success, we cannot afford fragmented, siloed solutions. It's imperative that we develop solutions and deployment practices and regulatory processes that are uniform, open, and will scale, and scale globally. Perhaps through modularization, interoperability through open standards, and dissemination of industry best practices. And we're all here to make that happen. So with that said, here is the forum inviting you to enjoy the event, learn from it, network with your colleagues, and have fun. Thank you, and look forward to meeting all of you in person on the floor.
So it sounds sure to be action-packed 2 days. So with that, I think you'll need some coffee and some sugar. We have a coffee break kindly hosted by Ericsson, and we will reconvene in here at 10:30 with the first session on enterprise. Thanks.